Hello and welcome to all our viewers on CFO Insights. I am Sherry, a financial technology consultant at Hyperbots, and I'm very excited to have Jon Naseath with me, who is an accomplished executive with expertise in AI, machine learning, and computer vision, driving impactful technology solutions in education, healthcare, and business. Thank you for joining us today, Jon, to discuss straight-through processing of invoices. Now let's dive right in. Why do you think companies implement constraints on straight-through processing of invoices, even in seemingly straightforward scenarios like three-way or two-way matching?
Yeah, I think the basic answer comes down to trust. The idea that someone's manually looked at it and verified just gives additional comfort when someone's not trusting the source data that they're looking at. And I think the short answer is just trust.
And in your experience, what are the most common value-based constraints that companies put in place for STP and why?
I think usually it comes down to certain dollar amounts. So if it's a high volume, low dollar amount processing, they'll let those payments go through. But then for bigger ones, they'll do. So like even banks have thresholds of say $10,000 for something international. They'll want additional details around it. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe. I think that there's oftentimes situations where if someone is going to do something fraudulent, they'll intentionally do below that threshold. Or I'll just tell a quick example. I was talking to a friend of mine yesterday or last week who's the CEO of a company, and over lunch he told me about how one of his trusted employees over the last year had been buying products and shipping them to their home for different things that they wanted and using for personal uses. And it was small amounts here and there, but when they added up, it was very impactful for the company and certainly nothing that was authorized. So I just be careful of even the small amounts. Need to have good controls and careful around them too.
And looking at the industry, how do vendor-specific constraints impact the straight-through processing process? And what factors might lead a company to require manual review for certain vendors?
Every vendor is going to run into troubles at some point. Every vendor is going to be try to stretch a payment or just pay you late because they can. Even big companies will do that just as out of policy. Having a way to review what is there and watching for controls around fraud need to be careful. Even companies that have a consistent record of accuracy and reliable payments may have their invoice processed automatically, and you can let those ones go through, but you need to monitor and kind of give a credit score, credit profile for the different vendors you're working with.
In talking about different obstacles, what are the challenges associated with STP for foreign versus domestic vendors, and how do companies typically address these challenges?
Well, one aspect is that foreign companies, it may take longer to get paid, or it may take longer when you do pay them to pay them. And you have to be able to pay, in some cases, via wire, where otherwise you might be able to send a direct pay payment. So just the processing is different. I wouldn't say that there's an increased risk, although some countries, sure, if they're countries that the US, for example, has limitations around doing business with, you want to be careful and not do those ones. But your bank will usually not let you send money to those anyways. So I don't know, as far as straight through processing, I don't know that the processes themselves would be very different, but it would just be different risk profiles of the companies individually, as was mentioned before.
And can you discuss the differences between contract-based and non-contract-based invoice processing and how these differences affect the decision to use STP?
Well, the catch here is with invoices. So you're talking about contract-based, and do you have a contract that defines what you'd be able to then pay on the invoice? If it's non-contract based, there might not even be an invoice either. And so there can be situations where a payment for whatever reason needs to be done and you don't have a formal invoice and you don't have a formal contract, and everyone will say, oh, that's not possible. And that would be the classic accounting answer is, we just don't do that. I'd say, having gone around the bend a few times, that there might be situations where you do need to send a payment and it can't wait for a formal invoice to come in. I'll let you dream up your own exceptions for why. The example I wanted to give there is, there's a lot of scary things that are being done on the negative side with AI, where I saw a situation where, with the voice mimicking that's able to happen, someone actually called a CEO using my voice, told that CEO to send a payment. Luckily, we had the controls in place, so it came back for my approval, and I was like, no, and I didn't approve it. And I called up the CEO and I was like, why are you saying to send this invoice to this person? And the CEO said, well, you called me and you told them to send the payment. And I was like, no. And so we set up a keyword control. And so anytime I'd call them to do something like that, we'd have a keyword. But the point is, whether it's a contract control and an invoice control, a keyword control, there's bad people doing scary things out there nowadays where they're all trying to get your money. And they can be very increasingly tricky. So having these controls in place, we'll talk about AI in a bit, but like invoices, contracts, all those different pieces, POs, are just ways of controlling that make sure the right people get paid the right amounts for the work they've completed.
That sounds like quite a challenge, John. And from what you have seen in the industry, how do companies typically handle PO only matching scenarios, and why might they opt for manual intervention in these cases?
With PO specifically, it's approved, but you still need to verify if the work has been provided. So like with the three-way match, you'll say that it's been received and you can identify and verify things. But a lot of times POs are done for services. And so you end up going to that project manager and having to rely on them to tell you, is that work completed? Have they done what they needed to do to get paid? And hopefully your controller in that example, or sorry, the program manager in that example is staying on top of the project and is approving only things that should get paid.
And what are the risks associated with processing non-PO and non-GRN invoices? And how can AI help mitigate these risks?
Yeah, so just to define it, goods received note, like that's the GRN, non-GRN and non-PO. If you don't have those things, how can AI help mitigate those? It's just watching for red flags. There's patterns, there's things that don't tie out. AI is wonderful at looking at all the different data inputs and seeing that everything reconciles. Quick example, I had a payment going through where, there's the classic O versus 0. And there's things that people will do to replace the right vendor name and make it look the same, but it's not really. I've also seen where a vendor was debiting from a bank account and they had personally separately created a way to debit bank account and again changed some letters in the name to make it look like it was the same one, but it was actually something totally fraudulent we caught. But it's only possible, well, it's a lot easier to catch through AI. AI can watch for those things that the human eye might miss, and it's helpful.
And finally, since AI is a trending topic, how do you see the role of AI evolving in the context of STP, especially with the various constraints we've just discussed?
AI is great because it can be that person who's watching your back, and it can help monitor for issues and for things that you just might not catch. And so, yes, you can put in preventative controls, detective controls, but having someone monitoring all the data transactions, all the things, and then raising the red flags where things are inconsistent, that's a great solution for where AI will be able to help in the long term, especially where the examples I gave, it's set up to look physically the same, and technologies like AI would be much better at catching things that are designed to trick humans.
Thank you so much for these insightful answers, John. It's sure from this interview that AI offers a promising solution to navigate such complexities.